Approaching the top of the hour, so we will be introducing our next speakers in just a moment. Okay, so next up we have Mike Giovanni and Steve Mulberry, whose cameras are coming on. Welcome. They are joining us from GIS Incorporated, and they're going to be following again on the theme of sort of infrastructure. So their topic today is on utility networks meeting cloud services and modernizing infrastructure management. So with that, I will turn the screen share over to you and take it away.
Perfect. Hey, thanks, Steve. Really appreciate it. And really glad to be here. Like you said, I'm Mike Chenevey, and I'm here with Steve Mulberry. We're with GISinc. We're a continental mapping company. I want to welcome you to our presentation today on utility network meets cloud services, modernizing infrastructure management. So I'm an account executive. I cover states and AEC with GISinc, and I've been a GIS consultant and business developer for about 20 years and live over in Chico, California. Pretty exciting place to be. Steve Mulberry is our geospatial innovation strategist with our solution engineering team, and he's been engaged with GIS over 30 years and lives in Boise, Idaho area. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over to Steve, the other Steve. We're gonna go with that.
All right, and Mike, keep me honest here with the PowerPoints and things like that. But as Mike mentioned, and I didn't know if you're aware of this, but GISinc just got acquired earlier this year. So GISinc is now a continental mapping company, and this is pretty exciting news for us and our customers. But today I want to take just a few minutes and share some strategies and lessons that we've learned from helping our customers adopt utility network and how to leverage cloud services. Both of these technologies can be challenging to understand, maybe when to use them, how to make the migration, best practices and strategies for making that switch. And we believe at GISinc that all organizations can benefit greatly from these, both of these technologies, both the utility network and cloud services. They truly introduce this modernized infrastructure and management platform. And my hope today is that you can kind of take away from this presentation things that will help you understand what you need to know for getting started, some of the benefits that you receive from both of these technologies, and some areas that you kind of can look at to get started. What do you need to do to get started? So let's first look at some things that you may need to know in regards to utility networks and cloud services. And I want to start off by kind of sharing with you, when I started at GISinc back in 2009, I helped develop our first cloud solution using Amazon Web Services. And since then, you can see from this chart, the trend that we experienced with our customers and organizations as they started to adopt the cloud. And this last year and a half, right, to say the least, has been unique. And maybe because of the pandemic, we are seeing even more activity in this space. And this is true and goes along with what the industry is telling us. And this chart from RightScale shows the cloud adoption rate. And you can see the big three there, right? Amazon Web Services, Microsoft, and Google. And what I take away from this is first the adoption rate itself. It's I've been kind of watching this over the years, and it's increasing yearly. But also, I kind of see that these cloud providers are competing for our business, and that competition helps drive down the cloud service costs. And so this is good for us, right? And I feel that now is a perfect time to look at cloud services if you haven't already done so. And if you're in the market and thinking about migrating to the utility network, bringing those two technologies together is a perfect marriage. Another chart I wanted to show here out of that same report is some of the challenges that small to medium businesses and enterprises are seeing as they move to the cloud. And I want to point out one here, and that's managing the cloud spending. There are some benefits, and I'll talk more about this later, from moving to the cloud, and costs are definitely one of them. But cost can also be your worst nightmare if you're not familiar with how the services and pay-as-you-go model can be leveraged. And so you can really spin up a lot of instances and get charged a lot of dollars per month. So you have to be aware of that. And so it goes along the lines here with what we're seeing with some of these challenges, from governance and security all the way down to the migration and the strategies behind that. And I'm going to focus in on some of those to kind of give you some insights into that. So when we think about the utility network and we think about cloud, both of these are new technologies, or I guess technologies that are transforming how we work with information, how we manage that information, and where is the infrastructure to help us organize those services and the software and the information itself. And so, for a lack of a better analogy, I threw up here the flip phone and the smartphone. So if you're old like me and you had a flip phone, then you remember back in the day when you started off this number pad, it was the greatest thing since sliced bread. And then when the smartphone came out, that touchscreen, initially, I have to admit, I was kind of like, there's no way I'm going to be able to use this. My fat fingers aren't going to make this thing work. But over time, I got used to it, and now I can't live without it. The same thing with calls and applications. Flip phone had simple apps, made direct calls. Now we have this full app store with very specific applications that help drive our day-to-day usage. The same thing with storage. Flip phones, we had SIM cards, physical storage. Nowadays, it's all cloud-based. And in fact, the Apple phones, they don't even have the ability to put SIM cards in there because it's all cloud storage and services that help drive the way we use these phones, even to the way we kind of managed our contacts. And I could go on and on with this, but that's sort of the transformation that we're seeing now with the utility network and with cloud services. And so if we focus in on the UN for a second, the transformation process here, we got to think of it as really a paradigm shift. This is not your traditional data model migration or upgrading a data model, right? Where we're used to working with the geometric for over 20 years. It's definitely has served its purpose and done us really well in this area, but it was a database driven approach to managing all things network. There were multiple functionality codes that were deployed and developed in this distributed environment, meaning we had an application for the smartphone, we had an application for web, we had an application for desktop, and all those were different development cycles and deployment releases, and it kind of made it hard to kind of synchronize that usage of those applications to what we're seeing now with the utility network, in that it's sort of it is a service-based architecture in this new software product release methodology, meaning that there's a single code base for all services, meaning that I can be on my phone or my tablet or the desktop or a web application, and the services that I hit are all the same. The geoprocessing tools that I access are all the same. The functionality that's exposed is all the same. And that makes it a really unique experience when working with this type of information. There's lots of other explicit capabilities and enhancements moving from the GM to the UN, but this is definitely a paradigm shift. And so we have to kind of sit back and think, okay, what does it take to get started? What's required? And I want to walk through this very quickly. So on the one side, Esri has released the Utility Network Foundation. This is the enterprise geodatabase approach, where you need to have things like ArcGIS Enterprise, you have utility network management software, you're using ArcGIS Desktop Pro. It's a client managed environment, highly customizable. We take advantage of branch versioning, and we kind of see this fitting in that mid to large size utility. But Esri's also released a sort of simplified hosted version of this called the Water Distribution Data Management for ArcGIS Online. And I guess I'm focusing in on the water side of this, but there's availability for other utilities. Think of this as sort of that fast startup for small organizations. It literally takes just a few minutes to deploy. It's all deployed within the ArcGIS Online organization. You have the ability to manage simple features still through ArcGIS Pro. That still becomes your desktop tool for those precision edits and managing the topology. But it gives you a chance, an opportunity to get familiar with the utility network, the data schema, how the services are published and accessed, and it gets you that jump start in there. And speaking of jump starts, we at GISinc can help jumpstart either platform here. So if you have the desire to kind of look at and manage either the enterprise approach or the online, we can help get things started here. So let's kind of look at this at a specific level here. So first off, you need ArcGIS Pro. Now I'm going to throw some version numbers out there. These are what we think the bare minimum are. I know Pro's at 2.9 now, and we're at Enterprise 10.9.1, but from a starting point, you can have 2.4 for Pro, and you need that add-in, the UN add-in. You need at least 10.7.1 Enterprise, standard or advanced for both of those. Server must be federated with Portal. You need the UN license and the extension deployed. Now, starting at 10.8, as we release these new user type extensions that help with the access and the authentication to things like the utility network, the parcel fabric, those leverage this new user type extension, which makes it really nice for administrators to gain access to that or to give privileges and permissions there. And then finally, you need access to an enterprise geodatabase, and these are the standard ones out there that are supported across the board. Now, another reason why I put the version numbers out there is to let you know that this isn't something that just happened overnight. This has been something that's been in the work for years. We're seeing the versions, even the Water Distribution Foundation itself is in version 3.x. So this has been around for a while. It's been tried and true, and there's actually, as we released early on, the release cycle is now sort of extended for the UN to give us more time to do that adoption and get used to the environment. So how does this look like if we deploy this in the cloud, and where the cloud comes into play when we're talking about the UN? So this is a typical design diagram that illustrates how we would deploy this in Amazon Web Services, but Microsoft and Google would be a similar design here. But we have several levels of security, from the internet gateway to the load balancer to a virtual private cloud to breaking out the public and private subnets where we can put different components of the enterprise in. But you can see the big four there, right? The web adapter, portal, ArcGIS server, and the data store. We typically like to separate out the portal, server, and data store, and it's in that private subnet. But this is where you would deploy the utility network, and we recommend isolating that in its own server role so that it doesn't impact the other activities that are happening in your web GIS. And you notice that there are also ArcGIS Desktop. This is always a big question when we talk to customers, that where does desktop sit and how do my editors now interface with the environment if it's up in the cloud? Hold that thought. I got a slide here that we're going to focus in on that. But what I want to highlight here, though, is that with your default licensing with ArcGIS Enterprise, you can actually stand up a passive production environment, either in the same availability zone within a cloud provider or an alternative availability zone to give you that geographic redundancy. And that second deployment could be so that take the role of that passive production. So if you need to do some upgrades or some enhancements to the active production, you can bring one down, one up. It can also act as a disaster recovery or a hot swappable sort of environment there. This is all part of the licensing. So it's a really nice model that you can use in a deployment pattern that you can take advantage of when you move to the cloud. So what about desktop? Let's talk about that a little bit more. So when you move ArcGIS Enterprise to the cloud, there's a decision you have to make. Do I leave desktop on premise, or do I move my editors and desktop to the cloud? And I'm here to say that the cloud providers are making this a little bit easier to move desktop to the cloud, especially ArcGIS Pro. So folks like Amazon Web Services provide things like virtual machines, which we're already used to, virtual workspaces. But there's this technology called app streaming, which gives me the ability to actually create a thin client accessibility to these thick clients like ArcGIS Pro and access them via web browsers or a thin client on my desktop, which gives me the ability to build out my desktop environment to spec if I'm using 3D capabilities, or processing imagery, or I'm actually using Pro within the UN space, or building my caches and things like that. I can provision what I need in this space and then only use this technology on demand when I need it, and then pay for what I use when I use it, which makes it a really nice addition to a cloud deployment pattern by moving your desktop to the cloud as well. Now, we know that both the UN and Parcel Fabric both leverage this services-oriented architecture, which lends us that capability to leave desktop on our local machines and access these services via the REST endpoint, which is a really nice benefit, which I want to talk to you about some of those today. So think of this
5-minute warning there, Steve.
Perfect. I'm almost there. So we've got lots of capabilities with utility network, from field mobility to improved capabilities within the networks, which really extends our use cases. The cloud opens up lots of capabilities with scaling and serverless computing and cost structure, and trading out that capital expenditures for variable expenses, even to the point of leveraging secured offerings that cloud providers provide. So if you need that additional security there. So what are some of the things you need to know? It's very simple. Create a plan, right? This is what we typically use. It's not the same thing for every customer, but one area we like to focus in on is a readiness assessment. This really helps us and the customers get to that strategy, understanding from the planning perspective, from the infrastructure, the staffing, desktop use, to execution, the roadmap. All these really play a role in here, and this is probably the most critical place to start off with. So I want to leave you with some questions that you can ask yourself. Do I have ArcGIS Enterprise? Right, this is a new technology. It's service-based. Do I have a standardized data model? This really affects the migration strategy. Am I using Pro? If not, start to get familiar with it. Do I have any third-party tools that we might break if I migrate to the cloud or the UN? And do you need some help, right? We're here to help. So finally, just the takeaways, right? We talked about platforms, we talked about the benefits, we talked about some of the things you need to do. Focus in on that readiness assessment, because that'll drive everything else about how you implement either in the cloud, the technology, or the UN or other technologies that Esri's exposing there. So thank you so much for letting us join your GIS Day activities. And if you have any questions at all, just go to gisync.com or take this QR code and email Mike or myself there.
All right. Well, thank you both, Mike and Steve, for the presentation. A lot of interesting things to think about, both on the utility network side and the technology there, as well as the whole idea of the cloud migration. So one question that I had come in is, how does this work for offline support when people are out in the field doing, like public works people doing field work on these networks? If they're
so nicely, Esri has built that into the enterprise, and you have access through field maps, the new field maps capability. So nothing changes from an offline capability. It's still the same technology. It's just running in the cloud. You still have the same access to the information.
Okay. And then, are there any performance issues that you are aware of or you've seen with clients as they move from an on-prem implementation of their software, whether it's desktop or other components, into the cloud environment? I know that that's a big fear for a lot of organizations, is we don't have that server in our building anymore. How do we know it's going to work and perform?
Exactly. And that's a whole nother discussion. But what I will say is that the cloud gives you the ability to elastically grow the environment based on the needs and the resources that are required to fulfill your request. So you can build that to scale, and you can scale up as needed. The gotcha here is when you start mixing and matching. So if you have a hybrid approach where you have desktop on-prem and then enterprise in the cloud, you could run into some problems there connecting to the data, either directly to the enterprise, to your database, or through REST services. So that's where you want to focus your attention and make sure you're doing the right thing for your organization.
Okay. And then what about just the general throughput? Or, we hear a lot, especially now with the infrastructure bill, around broadband connectivity, and not every one of our government, local government agencies or other people participating today necessarily have a great high-speed connection. Do these kinds of implementations of tracking utility networks and everything else work well in the cloud when I have a flaky connection?
Yes, I think that was the whole premise behind this new service-oriented architecture approach that Esri took, is that now these services you access the information via REST endpoints, via a URL, which meaning that the data packets are much more condensed and packed and more streamlined. So you're actually hitting, similar like to web pages. So you're not directly connecting to the data and streaming down all that information to the extent you're viewing this from a REST endpoint, which is actually perfect for low bandwidth circumstances.
Okay, great. And then another question that comes up is, what about security, especially around utility networks, which are often perceived as something we want to protect. We don't want people necessarily knowing where all of our valves and switches and whatever the utility network is are in detail. Are these approaches secure?
Yes. So this is probably one of the bigger discussions that we have in our customers when we start to move to the cloud itself. I will say this. I've been working in this space for over 30 years, and I've seen some crazy data centers in some local government facilities. I was part of one of them where a front door was propped open by a fan or whatever it might be. These cloud providers, that's their job, is to secure our infrastructure, but there's a shared responsibility. So cloud providers are responsible for security in the cloud. We're still responsible for security of the cloud. So the ports and who we give access to and how we implement security policy and things like that, we still have control of that, and rightly so, because we need that to lock down access to it. So you have full control of that.
Okay. And one just popped up in the Q&A window. From Oscar, how do we find the need to have a utility network user license? Have you worked with Esri on how you can get lower pricing per user if you're buying licenses?
Well, unfortunately, I do not have a direct link to Jack, but we hear you, right? We hear you. And what's neat about the new user type extension is that if, depending on the user that's part of your enterprise, that add-in just becomes literally just a small add-in. And so the price reflects that. So if I'm a viewer needing just some basic access, well, that price affects and reflects that user level. So it does go up based on your need and access, from viewer to field editor to creator to pro. And Esri's done a really good job at sort of aligning those pricing with those user types.
Okay. And sort of a related question that came in is sort of that high level cost comparison. If I'm moving from on-prem and licensing in-house and maintaining servers and data in-house to the cloud and managing my, am I saving either in hard costs for infrastructure and data management or also in staffing costs? I mean, how does this change how staffing at an organization manages the data? Does it save money?
Well, it could it could impact both areas, but without careful thought, these costs could increase too if you don't organize the cloud to do what you need to do, and or organize and train your staff to help maintain that. Most IT departments that I talk to nowadays, they're already thinking cloud first. They're already looking at ways to leverage cloud services, because by nature, these cloud providers want to make it easy for an easy entry point in to get you started in the cloud, and then you scale up as needed. And I think the biggest thing is that you actually get to trade capital expenditure for relative expense. So you no longer have to do this hardware refresh on premise every 3 years, 5 years. You use what you use when you use it, and you only pay for what you use when you use it, which is a really nice model. In fact, last point there, the more you use, the cheaper it gets. And I'd love to talk to you more about that.
Yeah, And I know that's a question a lot of our participants here have in mind as they think about this cloud migration. So we are at about 5 of the bottom of the hour, which is where we like to take our 5-minute break. So again, I want to thank Mike and Steve for taking the time to talk to us about utility networks and cloud. It's certainly a fast-moving world we all live in, and they're trying to think through how we can improve our processes and workflows. So I appreciate that. We will take 5 now and come back at the bottom of the hour, moving to indoor mapping with our next presenter. So we'll see you in 5 minutes. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, thank you.